The air roared like a furnace as Captain Sophia Hale pushed her helicopter through the jagged mountain valleys. She had flown countless combat missions before, yet something about this particular flight gnawed at her instincts. The intelligence report had described the route as low threat. But Sophia, with more than 2,000 hours of flight experience, had long ago learned not to trust easy assurances. She had been trained to expect the unexpected, and on this day her instincts proved tragically correct. One moment, the sky was clear and sharp, her Apache slicing above the tree-line like a predator hunting its prey. The next, the radar warning shrieked. 2 missile signatures leapt onto her display, rising from hidden positions on the ridgeline. "Missiles incoming," her co-pilot, Lieutenant Michael Reyes, shouted, gripping the controls. Sophia banked hard left, deploying countermeasures in a desperate attempt to shake them off. Flares blazed behind them, dazzling streaks against the sky. For an instant she thought they might survive it. Then the first missile struck. The helicopter shuddered violently as the explosion tore through the main rotor assembly. A cascade of alarms filled the cockpit. Michael's scream was cut short when shrapnel punched through the canopy, striking him before he could even react. Sophia's training took over. She forced her trembling hand steady, fighting to keep the dying aircraft under control. Smoke poured into the cabin, stinging her eyes, but she refused to let the bird spin into the rocks below. Auto-rotation, the last lifeline of a stricken helicopter, was her only chance. She flared the craft, searching desperately for a clearing among the forested slopes. With a deafening crash of snapping branches, the helicopter slammed into the ground. The impact jolted her teeth. Pain surged through her side, but she was alive. She had survived the impossible. Enemy soldiers swarmed the crash site within minutes. Sophia stumbled from the wreckage, half-dazed, her side bleeding. Rifles pressed into her back as rough hands dragged her away from the smoking remains of the helicopter. She wanted to fight, to reach for her sidearm, but there were too many, and her body was too broken. That night she was marched through the forest, shackled and beaten. The stars overhead looked like cold, indifferent eyes. She thought of Michael, her co-pilot, her friend now gone. The guilt weighed heavier than her chains. The enemy commander, Robert Volkov, awaited her arrival at the prison compound. A man of iron discipline and pitiless reputation, he studied her with detached interest as she was thrown before him. His uniform was immaculate, his posture that of someone accustomed to control. He glanced at her bloodied flight suit and gave a thin smile. "Another captured pilot," he remarked in his native tongue before switching to English. "You will be useful, Captain. Perhaps you will tell us how your army flies these machines. Perhaps not. It makes no difference. You will break, as they all do." Sophia said nothing. Her training held her tongue. She had been drilled countless times. Name, rank, serial number. Nothing more. But inside, her resolve hardened. She would not be broken. As guards dragged her to her cell, memories flickered unbidden. She thought back to Louisiana, to the endless summer skies of her childhood. Her father, a retired pilot himself, had often taken her to the airfield. She remembered sitting on his shoulders as the helicopters thundered overhead, watching with wide-eyed wonder. He used to tell her, "Flying is more than skill, Sophia. It's about thinking in 3 dimensions, about seeing patterns others can't. If you master that, you'll always be one step ahead." Those words had carried her through training, through the unforgiving crucible of combat deployments. They came back to her now, like an anchor against despair. She was her father's daughter. She was a soldier of the skies. Her cell was a narrow box of concrete and rusted bars. The air smelled of damp earth and diesel. Through the small slit of a window, she could see only the jagged silhouettes of pines against the horizon. The prison was buried deep in the mountains, surrounded by natural barriers and patrolled by guards with dogs. Escape seemed impossible. Perhaps that was why Volkov looked so smug. On the 3rd night, she lay awake listening to the distant chop of rotors as enemy helicopters patrolled overhead. The sound was both torment and inspiration. To the guards, those aircraft were symbols of dominance. To Sophia, they were opportunities waiting to be seized. She studied their flight paths, the timing of their sweeps, the rhythm of their landings. She was already gathering information, even in chains. But first, she needed to survive. Volkov began his interrogations almost immediately. He asked about weapon systems, flight tactics, base locations. His methods were cold and calculated: sleep deprivation, hunger, psychological manipulation. Yet Sophia gave nothing. She repeated her name, rank, and number with unwavering calm. He sneered, but she saw the flicker of frustration behind his eyes. "You Americans think you are strong," he told her one evening, standing in the dim interrogation room. "But strength fades. Hunger, pain, loneliness, they will peel you apart like the layers of an onion. And when that happens, Captain, I will know everything you know." Sophia lifted her gaze, her voice steady though her body ached. "You'll get nothing from me." Volkov's smile was thin, like a knife's edge. "We'll see." Back in her cell, Sophia pressed her forehead to the cold wall, breathing slowly, centering herself. She whispered a promise to Michael's memory, to her father's teachings, and to herself. She would not end here, forgotten in a mountain prison. She would find a way. The guards thought they had captured a broken pilot. What they did not yet realize was that they had imprisoned a storm. The prison compound was buried in the folds of the mountain range, a labyrinth of fences, towers, and concrete barracks hidden beneath thick forest canopies. To any outsider, it would look like nothing more than a scattering of aging buildings, but inside its walls lay a machine designed to crush the human spirit. For Captain Sophia Hale, the first days passed in a haze of exhaustion and pain. Each morning, guards yanked her from her cot and marched her into the dim interrogation room where Commander Robert Volkov waited. Volkov was not the type to shout or rant. His weapon was patience. He circled her with quiet questions, always circling back to the same points: aircraft systems, flight tactics, American bases. When she refused, he let silence stretch until the air itself seemed heavy. Sometimes he left her in the chair for hours, shackled, cold, and hungry, knowing that emptiness was its own form of torture. But Sophia had been prepared for this. Before deployment, every pilot underwent survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. She had been forced to endure mock interrogations, simulated captivity, and even staged starvation. Those memories were no longer training scenarios, they were lifelines. Every time she repeated her name, rank, and number, she heard her instructors reminding her, "Hold the line. You are stronger than they believe." At night, locked in her cell, she began to listen more carefully. The prison had its own rhythm. Guards rotated every 6 hours. Patrol dogs barked before each change, as if they sensed the unease of men about to hand over their duties. Helicopters thumped overhead on a predictable schedule, circling once at dawn, once at dusk. From her narrow window, she could sometimes glimpse their shapes as they hovered near the compound's edge. Their floodlights swept the treetops, searching for threats that never came. Sophia watched, memorizing every sound, every interval. The guards thought she was broken, but in truth, she was studying them with the precision of a predator. Her mind worked like it did in the cockpit, calculating angles, timing patterns, noting weaknesses. The other prisoners noticed her calm. At first, they avoided her. New captives often cracked under the strain, and no one wanted to be dragged down by another's despair. But when she shared half of her meager bread ration with a wounded soldier, they began to see her differently. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered man with scarred hands, whispered to her one night when the guards were far enough away. "My name's Sergeant Michael Thompson," he said. His voice was gravelly but steady. "I've been here 3 weeks. I'm planning a way out." Sophia studied him through the gloom. His posture carried the weight of experience. His eyes had the hardened look of someone who had seen too much. "An escape?" she asked softly. Thompson nodded. "We've counted the guards. They change shifts at midnight. That's when we move. The forest is thick. If we move fast enough, we can vanish before they bring dogs." Sophia listened but felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been a soldier long enough to know the flaw. "The helicopters," she whispered. "They'll hunt us from above. Thermal imaging will cut through the forest. You'll last 6 hours, maybe less, before they corner you." Thompson frowned, clearly not used to having his plans questioned. It's better than rotting in here. I'm not saying don't escape, Sophia replied. But running isn't enough. We need to change the game. He gave her a skeptical look. What are you suggesting? She hesitated. It sounded reckless even in her own mind, but the idea had been growing since her first night, when she heard the helicopters circling above. We don't run from their aircraft, she said at last. We take one. Thompson almost laughed, then saw the seriousness in her eyes. You think you can fly one of theirs? I know I can, she answered. Helicopters are different in layout, but the principles are the same. I've spent 3 days listening to their patrols. They land near the camp at predictable times to refuel and report. If we hit them then, I can get us out. Thompson rubbed his jaw, thinking. The idea was insane, yet there was conviction in her tone that made it hard to dismiss. Over the next days, the two of them spoke in stolen whispers, exchanging fragments of information. Thompson had studied the guards' routines on the ground, while Sophia tracked the sky. Together, they began to weave a plan that was unlike any escape attempted before. Still, Volkov's shadow loomed. The commander seemed to sense her resilience, and his methods grew harsher. One evening he entered the cell himself, dismissing the guards. He crouched before her, eyes sharp as blades. You are disciplined, he said quietly. Stronger than most. But every soldier has a breaking point. When your courage falters, when you finally give me what I want, remember that I gave you the chance to surrender with dignity. Sophia met his gaze. Her body ached. Her throat was dry, but she forced the words out. You'll never get what you want. His expression hardened. We'll see. When he left, she leaned against the wall, trembling not from fear but from determination. She had seen the arrogance in his eyes. He believed he had all the power. That arrogance would be his downfall. The prison was built to contain soldiers on foot, not aviators who thought in 3 dimensions. Sophia intended to prove that soon enough. The days in captivity blurred together, yet beneath the monotony, a quiet storm was building. Every clank of the gates, every shouted order from a guard, every thump of rotor blades overhead became fuel for Captain Sophia Hale's determination. She no longer thought of herself as merely surviving. She was preparing. Sergeant Michael Thompson continued to refine his escape plan in whispers during mealtime or under the cover of darkness. His method was practical and direct. Overpower the guards during the midnight shift change, break through the perimeter fence, and scatter into the dense forest. He had faith in endurance, in the ability to vanish among trees and mountains. But Sophia knew better. Helicopters had hunted her enemies in the deserts of Afghanistan, and she had seen firsthand how hopeless it was to outrun an eye in the sky. She remembered how the thermal sensors lit up fleeing figures, as bright as fire against the cold ground. The forest would not save them, it would betray them. One night, she challenged Thompson again. If we try your plan, she whispered, we'll be running into their hands. Those machines will track us like wolves following wounded prey. He narrowed his eyes, annoyed. Then what's your solution, Captain? Sit here until they bleed us dry. Her reply came firm, unwavering. No, we steal their wings. The words carried weight. A few other prisoners nearby turned their heads, listening. Thompson exhaled, shaking his head. It's madness. Do you even know how to fly their machines? Sophia leaned closer, her voice low but filled with conviction. Principles of flight don't change. Controls differ, yes, but I've studied engineering as much as combat. I've listened to their patrols, memorized their routines. They land near the compound each evening, careless and predictable. Give me one chance, Sergeant. I can fly us out. The room fell into silence, broken only by the drip of water from the ceiling. The boldness of her words shocked them all. But slowly, she saw doubt shift into curiosity in Thompson's eyes. Even if you're right, he said finally, how do we get close enough? Guards swarm that landing zone. That's where your plan comes in, Sophia replied. We create chaos, a fake breakout along the eastern wall. They'll think we're all running. While their attention is there, a smaller group intercepts the helicopter during refuel. For the first time, Thompson didn't dismiss her outright. He rubbed his scarred hands together thoughtfully. If we fail, They'll execute us on the spot. Sophia gave a faint smile. Then we make sure we don't fail. Over the following days, the idea spread among the prisoners like sparks in dry grass. Some scoffed at the risk, but most were weary of waiting for rescue that never came. Sophia became the quiet center of their planning, her calm confidence drawing them in. She spoke not with wild hope, but with the steady certainty of a soldier who had faced death and lived. At night, she sketched flight paths in the dirt with her finger, describing how the stolen helicopter could mask itself along valleys and ridges to avoid radar. She explained how fuel would determine their range, how every minute in the air would matter. Her technical detail convinced even the skeptics. Still, not everyone believed. A younger prisoner named Private John Carter shook his head one evening. "This is suicide, even if we capture it. Do you know how fast they'll scramble jets to shoot us down?" Sophia locked eyes with him. "Faster than we can run on foot? No. Our only chance is to fight on their level. If we stay on the ground, we die tired and hunted. In the air, at least we have teeth." Thompson backed her then, surprising himself as much as anyone. "I've led men into impossible situations before," he muttered. "Sometimes the impossible is the only path left." Meanwhile, Volkov continued his relentless interrogations, unaware of the storm brewing in his camp. He believed the silence of the prisoners meant submission. He could not see how every insult, every beating, every long night in chains only bound them tighter together. Sophia found herself remembering her father during those moments of doubt. She could almost hear his voice. "When they think they've trapped you, that's when you strike hardest. Never fight where your enemy expects it. Fight where they least imagine." His words became the pulse of her resolve. On the fourth evening, Sophia overheard a pair of guards chatting near the cell block. They spoke casually about the Hind helicopter that landed each night at the western clearing, about how predictable its arrival was. She stored every detail in her mind like ammunition. That night, lying on the hard cot, she whispered to Thompson, "Tomorrow we make our move." His reply was a low growl of determination. "Then we had better be ready." Sophia closed her eyes, breathing slow. Tomorrow they would no longer be prisoners. Tomorrow, the world would learn that the most dangerous soldier is the one you think is broken. The guards laughed at them by day, mocking their ragged uniforms and hollow eyes. They could not imagine that the very people they dismissed as beaten would soon strike with stolen thunder. And as Sophia drifted into uneasy sleep, she felt no fear, only the steady hum of anticipation, like the vibration of rotor blades in the distance, calling her back to the sky. The prison compound hummed with its usual evening rhythm. Guards smoked by the gate, dogs prowled along the fences, and somewhere beyond the walls, the echo of approaching rotor blades rolled through the valley. The sound was both familiar and ominous, the heartbeat of the enemy's dominance. For Captain Sophia Hale and Sergeant Michael Thompson, it was the sound they had been waiting for. Tonight, the plan would either carry them to freedom, or bury them all in the cold earth of the mountains. As darkness settled, the prisoners moved with calculated precision. Every detail had been rehearsed in whispers, every step weighed against the risk of discovery. 12 captives would participate in the breakout, but only a fraction knew the true objective. Most believed they were staging a desperate run for the forest, and that belief was part of the deception. The enemy had to be convinced the prisoners were fleeing east before the ambush could succeed. Sophia crouched near the cell door, her pulse steady, her breathing slow. She was not afraid. Flying combat missions had taught her long ago that fear was useless in the face of action. What mattered was focus, the sharp clarity that came when every decision counted. Thompson gave a short nod. The signal. With a sudden burst, the prisoners surged against the guards as the midnight shift began. Shouts erupted. Fists struck steel helmets. Dogs barked furiously. The compound exploded into chaos. Alarms wailed, echoing across the valley. Guards rushed toward the eastern wall, just as planned, convinced the captives were making a mad dash for the tree-line. Sophia and Thompson slipped into the shadows with a smaller group. 5 men who carried stolen weapons wrested from unsuspecting guards. "Stay low," Sophia hissed. "The helicopter will land in less than 2 minutes." They moved quickly across the compound, hearts pounding with the knowledge that discovery meant certain death. Beyond the outer fence, in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, the thunder of rotors grew louder. The enemy's Me-24 Hind descended like an iron beast, its landing lights cutting through the darkness. To its crew, the landing was routine: refuel, report, redeploy. They had no idea they were flying straight into the jaws of their own prisoners. The Hind touched down, its engines roaring as the pilots conducted post-flight checks. A pair of ground soldiers stood nearby, weapons slung carelessly over their shoulders. They expected to coordinate with pursuit teams, hunting fugitives, not defend against an ambush. Sophia raised her hand. Now, Thompson and the others burst from the tree line, weapons raised. The first guard fell before he could react, a muffled cry lost in the noise of the rotors. The second spun in confusion, only to be tackled by two prisoners. Inside the cockpit, the pilot looked up in shock as Sophia climbed onto the side of the helicopter, yanking open the hatch. "Out!" she shouted in the enemy's language, her voice sharp and commanding. The stunned pilot froze, torn between instinct and disbelief. Prisoners weren't supposed to have this kind of boldness. A moment's hesitation was all Sophia needed. She pressed the muzzle of her stolen rifle to the console. "Move, or this bird burns." The crew scrambled out, hands raised. Thompson dragged them away, while the other prisoners secured the perimeter. Sophia dropped into the cockpit, her eyes sweeping across the unfamiliar controls. The layout was different from the Apache she had mastered, yet the heartbeat of rotary flight was the same. Cyclic, collective, pedals, principles carved into her bones through years of training. "Can you fly it?" Thompson shouted over the roar of engines. Sophia's hands moved with certainty across the switches. "I can fly anything with blades. Get everyone inside. Now." The prisoners scrambled aboard, cramming into the troop bay designed for armed soldiers, not weary captives. The weight pressed the Hind close to its limits, but Sophia had flown under worse. She eased the collective, feeling the massive machine respond like a beast waking from slumber. Floodlights cut through the night as enemy forces realized the deception. Shouts carried across the compound. Tracer rounds streaked skyward. Sophia gritted her teeth and pulled the helicopter into the air. Bullets slammed against the armor plating, sparks dancing along the fuselage. Thompson fired from the side door, returning shots to keep the guards' heads down. Sophia banked hard, using the terrain for cover, the Hind shuddering as it skimmed treetops. "They're mobilizing," Thompson called, listening to captured radios. "Ground units converging. More helicopters inbound." Sophia's jaw tightened. "Then we move faster." The Hind thundered low through the valley, hugging the contours of the land. Sophia felt the machine straining, its controls sluggish compared to her Apache, but her mind adapted instantly. She drew on her father's lessons, on the countless combat missions that had sharpened her instincts. Every ridge was a shield, every shadow a hiding place. Behind them, the prison compound erupted with confusion. Alarms continued to wail, but the enemy had miscalculated fatally. They thought they were chasing scattered fugitives in the woods. None of them had considered that their own war machine could be turned against them. Sophia's voice cut through the intercom, calm and commanding. "Hold tight. We're not running. We're taking the fight back to them." Thompson's eyes widened. "You're going back?" Sophia gave a fierce smile, her steel-gray gaze locked on the horizon. "They wanted a pilot. Now they're going to see what that means." The prisoners exchanged stunned looks. Exhausted, half-starved, they suddenly realized they weren't merely escaping. They were about to become the edge of a blade aimed straight at the heart of their captors. As the Hind banked wide, Sophia steadied her breathing. The machine roared beneath her hands, a stolen thunderstorm ready to be unleashed. She had been underestimated, mocked as another broken pilot. Tonight, she would prove that the sky belonged to those daring enough to seize it. The battle was no longer about survival. It was about reckoning. The captured helicopter cut through the night, like a phantom of steel and fire. Inside the cockpit, Captain Sophia Hale felt every vibration, every tremor of the massive machine beneath her hands. The controls were foreign, the layout strange, Yet the language of flight was universal. She had spoken it since childhood, and tonight it answered her with fierce obedience. Behind her, the bay was crammed with rescued prisoners. Their faces were pale from fear and exhaustion, but in their eyes burned something brighter. Hope, fragile yet undeniable. Sergeant Michael Thompson crouched by the side hatch, gripping his weapon as he watched the mountain streak past. His jaw was set, but when he looked toward Sophia, there was a flicker of something he had not shown before belief. "Ground forces are scrambling," he shouted over the roar, "and they've called for more air support. We've got minutes before they figure out where we went." Sophia's gaze stayed locked on the horizon. "Then we use those minutes well." She banked the hind sharply, swinging it back toward the prison compound. The prisoners gasped as the aircraft tilted, but Sophia's voice was steady, calm as if she were guiding them through a routine drill. "I didn't come this far to just run. That camp has held too many of our people. We end it tonight." The word struck like a spark. Thompson's eyes narrowed, then he gave a grim nod. "Do it." The prison lights glimmered below as the compound came into view, alarm sirens still screaming through the valley. Guards scrambled, searching the forest for fugitives they thought had fled. None of them were prepared for the shadow descending from the sky. Their own helicopter turned against them. Sophia armed the weapon systems, her fingers dancing over switches she had never touched before. Training in engineering had given her an instinctive grasp of mechanisms, and combat experience had taught her improvisation. She fired the first salvo with ruthless precision. Rocket streaked downward, smashing into a guard tower with a thunderclap that shook the ground. Flames bloomed high, painting the night in orange and black. The prisoners cheered, the sound raw and disbelieving. Thompson grinned fiercely, firing bursts into the compound below as guards scattered like ants under boiling water. Sophia's voice cut through the headset, crisp and focused. "Targeting communications hub. Hold steady." She unleashed another strike, and the radio tower disintegrated in a shower of sparks and twisted steel. The enemy's ability to coordinate was gone in seconds. On the ground, Commander Robert Volkov stormed from his quarters, his face pale with disbelief. He shouted orders into a dead radio, his voice lost beneath the roar of rotors. He had thought the Americans broken, helpless. Now he watched in horror as his own weapon became their avenging hand. The hind swept low across the camp, its cannons tearing through barracks and fuel tanks. Explosions rolled one after another, fire-chasing men who had once jeered at Sophia's captivity. Yet her strikes were precise. Every blast aimed away from the makeshift cells where other prisoners might still be held. Years of combat discipline guided her hands. This was not slaughter but retribution, measured and exact. Thompson leaned close to the intercom. "They're broken. Look at them. They don't even know how to fight back." Sophia's eyes narrowed as she pulled the helicopter into a wide arc. "Good. Let them remember this night every time they hear rotor blades." Volkov's last command was drowned in chaos as a final rocket ignited the ammunition depot. The explosion ripped through the compound with seismic force, tearing walls apart and hurling debris into the forest. In less than 10 minutes, the prison had ceased to exist. Smoke trailed in the hind's wake as Sophia guided it westward. The prisoners sat in stunned silence, their faces lit by the glow of fire fading behind them. None could quite believe what they had witnessed, a single pilot turning captivity into conquest. Hours passed as the helicopter skimmed low through valleys and ridges, avoiding radar. Sophia navigated by instinct and memory, calculating coordinates against terrain features she had glimpsed only once before. Fatigue gnawed at her, but resolve held her upright. At dawn, the faint crackle of an American radio frequency filled the cockpit. Sophia seized the microphone. "Friendly forces, this is Captain Sophia Hale. I am piloting a captured enemy hind helicopter with 13 rescued prisoners aboard. Request immediate clearance and safe passage." There was a stunned pause before the reply crackled back. "Captain Hale, confirm. You're flying what?" She allowed herself the smallest smile. "Confirmed. Enemy aircraft. Prisoners safe. Prison destroyed. Requesting landing coordinates." Cheers erupted in the bay as the prisoners realized they were finally free. Thompson clapped a hand on her shoulder, his voice rough with pride. "You did it, Captain. You really did it." Sophia's smile was faint but fierce. "No, we did it." When they finally touched down at a forward operating base, soldiers rushed to surround the helicopter, weapons raised in disbelief until recognition swept over them. The sight of emaciated prisoners climbing from the enemy machine sent shockwaves through the camp. Sophia descended last, her uniform tattered, her face smeared with smoke, but her posture unbroken. 6 months later, she stood in dress uniform as a general pinned the Distinguished Service cross to her chest. Applause thundered through the hall, but Sophia's thoughts were elsewhere, on Michael Reyes, her fallen co-pilot, on the men she had freed, and on the smoldering ruins of a camp that would never cage another pilot again. Her story spread across military circles like wildfire. Cadets learned her name, aviators studied her tactics, and even enemies whispered in uneasy tones about the woman who had stolen their thunder. To this day, when Sophia Hale trains young pilots, she reminds them of the lesson that carried her through captivity. Any aircraft can become a weapon, any prison a battlefield, and any prisoner a soldier still fighting. For in the end, the most dangerous mistake an enemy can make is to believe their captive is broken.